Russia had big plans for 2026. Ukraine's defenses were supposed to collapse. The Donbas, which has been central to peace talks, would fall under the might of an overwhelming spring and summer offensive. But the plans have been shattered. It's not Russia that's gaining ground, it's Ukraine. Massive amounts of territory have been liberated by Ukraine in a victory so soul-crushing that Russia has been put to shame. A war-ending withdrawal is underway as Ukraine has stormed through Russian defenses to reclaim 600 square kilometers of territory. Putin's Ukraine invasion has always been shameful. But as Russia's soldiers cower and their defenses crumble, there's a whole new heaping of shame to add. Let's start with the headline number. On June 8th, Reuters reported on comments made by the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky. He says that the momentum in the Ukraine war has shifted in 2026. After 4 years of grinding, albeit glacially slow advances by Russia, Ukraine is turning the tide. 2026 has been a banner year so far. In 6 months, Ukraine has liberated 600 square kilometers of territory from Russia. These claims are backed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is sharing the same figures, and they are indicative of a 2026 campaign that isn't going the way that Putin expected. This year was supposed to finally deliver the Donbas to Russia. Now, the hallmark of 2026 is the sight of Russian troops cowering, dying, or running away from the territory Ukraine is reclaiming. This is shameful for Russia, but we'll get to that. First, the 600 square kilometers figure wasn't the only number that Syrsky and Ukraine's military shared. May has been a banner month for Ukraine and an absolute failure for Russia. According to Syrsky, the ratio of liberated to lost territory in May was around 100 square kilometers in Ukraine's favor. What this means is that Ukraine liberated more territory than Russia managed to gain in May. This has happened at the end of a spring offensive that was supposed to set the stage for the collapse of the Donbas in the summer. Despite constant enemy pressure, the armed forces of Ukraine continue to hold the line, eliminate the occupying forces, and carry out effective strikes against the enemy deep within its operational and strategic rear. These are the key results of our military's activities in May, which we reviewed during our monthly summary meeting, Syrsky declared, with that mention of strikes in the rear giving us a clue as to how Ukraine is pulling all this off. There are some caveats to this number. Though Syrsky was quick to point out the 100 square kilometer figure, he was more reticent when it came to where Ukraine is making its gains. The Ukrainian military's commander-in-chief did point out that Russia has intensified its assault tempo, especially in the east and south of Ukraine. Fighting is constant on the Pokrovsk, Huliapola, and Oleksandrivka fronts, so it's not that Russia isn't trying. It's just that Putin's forces are failing, constantly. Ukraine has a strategy of picking apart Russian defenses whenever the opportunity arises across the 1,200-kilometer front, and it's working. Though Syrsky didn't say it outright, we can assume that many of Ukraine's gains are coming in the south and southeast of its territory. Earlier in 2026, Ukraine began a series of counteroffensives on the Oleksandrivka axis, which serves as a sort of junction between the Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts. Those counteroffensives had led to Ukraine reclaiming around 400 square kilometers of its territory by early March, so it stands to reason that Ukraine is still picking apart select Russian fortifications on the Oleksandrivka axis to add to its gains, perhaps while taking advantage of other areas of weakness in the process. So what we're seeing here is twofold. Russia is trying, and failing, to make substantial gains in the east and south with its higher attack tempo across the front line. Ukraine takes a different approach. It's creating weaknesses in the Russian lines, and those mid-range strikes we mentioned are playing a huge role. Once the weakness is found, lightning-fast and precise counterattacks are launched to push back Russian forces. This is intelligent de-Russification, and it's forcing Putin's forces to withdraw in shame. To make matters worse for Russia's failing forces, May also marks the second month in a row that Russia has experienced a net territorial loss in Ukraine. That's according to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, which says that looking at territory changes while ignoring Russian infiltration attempts into the grey zones of Ukraine painted a sorry picture for Russia in April. Ukraine was in the black for the month, to the tune of a net territory gain of 116.01 square kilometers. The only thing that Russia could hang its hat on was sneaking tiny units, often containing as few as 1 or 2 soldiers, into grey zone areas, where those soldiers waited and hoped that Ukraine's drones wouldn't find them. That's not control, it's cowardice masquerading as occupation. Let's come back to May. The fact that Ukraine is around 100 square kilometers to the good isn't the only figure that will have Russia hanging its collective head in shame. No matter where you look, the numbers don't stack up to anything like the Donbas destroying campaign that Putin had in mind. The New York Post reports that Ukraine struck a staggering 88,000 Russian targets in May, giving the country a strike tempo of 2,838 attacks per day across the occupied territories and inside Russia itself. More than 30,000 of Russia's soldiers were eliminated as a result of these strikes, plus the attacks on Russia, which consisted of yet more strikes against the country's energy infrastructure, as well as visits by Ukraine's drones to Moscow, inflicted $1 billion worth of damage to Russia's military-industrial complex. More numbers come from United 24 Media, which says that Ukrainian deep strike assets hit 111 targets inside Russia across the country's energy, fuel, and military-industrial sectors. Ukraine is crippling the Russian war machine from the inside, and Siersky says that this is happening because Ukraine now has a unified plan that makes the country's long-range strikes more effective than ever before. Even Ukraine's navy got in on the act. May saw a country that barely has a warship to its name, though it makes up for that with plenty of maritime and aerial drones, carry out 1,500 operations designed to protect Ukrainian shipping. The result was that 633 of Ukraine's vessels managed to reach ports in the Danube River and Greater Odessa, meaning Russia couldn't even put a dent in Ukraine's commercial shipping. As for Russia, it didn't have much to crow about in May, which is a reflection of how all of 2026 has been for Putin's patsies so far. For all of its increases in assault tempo, Russia's advance has essentially ground to a standstill. Any advances the Russian army makes in one region of the front are being countered elsewhere, leading to Ukraine seizing the initiative. On May 29th, Al Jazeera reported that Russia's territorial losses in 2026 so far are triple those we saw in 2025, and the country's casualty rate was already 145,000 this year. Of those casualties, 86,000 were deaths versus 59,000 injuries, which means that Russia isn't just losing ground, it's losing people permanently. The momentum of the war has shifted in Ukraine's favor, and Zelensky himself has outlined what the situation looks like right now. It cannot be said that Russia is losing this war, but it can be said that it's losing the initiative every day, day by day, Ukraine's president said in a June 9th interview. Translation: Russia's great advance has petered out into a whole load of nothing. Ukraine holds the cards and has the upper hand across the front. And while this shift doesn't mean that Ukraine is about to go on a rampage to expel Russia from its territory, it has the potential to be war-ending because it means that the narrative that Putin crafted has fallen to pieces. Russia's president wants the world to think that Ukraine is there for the taking. Ukraine has spent 2026 proving Putin wrong, and that is a great embarrassment designed to push Russia into a shameful withdrawal from the war. Let's talk about shame for a moment. Putin seems like a man who has none. He has happily ordered his military to commit war crimes in Ukraine, all in service of his desire to go down in history as one of the great Russian leaders. Pointing that out isn't enough to shame Putin. But what will make Russia's leader hang his head is being exposed as such an inept military tactician that what was supposed to be a quick and easy victory for the all-powerful Russian army has turned not only into an attritional slog, but a war that Russia is starting to lose. 2026 was supposed to be the end of Ukraine, but it's turned into the year that the Russian myth was exposed. That's what will leave Putin red in the face. But before we dig deeper into that, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this comes from, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our daily videos. To understand how Ukraine has finally made Putin feel shame for his war, we have to understand Putin. Russia's leader is a man who values power above all else. He makes grand declarations and expects them to become reality. We see that in the Donbas right now. Putin believed that the Russian military would take all of the Donbas by the fall of 2026, which would involve making massive advances in Ukraine's east and crippling the Donetsk fortress belt. Putin was so confident of this claim that he tried to use it as leverage in peace talks, telling Ukraine that it should cede the Donbas before the rampaging Russian military crushed Ukraine's defenses. The reality on the ground is telling a very different story, and that embarrasses Putin. Russian forces aren't rampaging, they're running and hiding. We see that on the Kinburn spit right now. On June 9th, the New Voice of Ukraine reported that the Ukrainian partisan group Atesh says that Russian forces are actively abandoning their positions on the northern and western parts of the Kinburn spit, following Ukrainian strikes that have disrupted supply flows and left those troops isolated. That's a pattern that is being repeated all over the front lines, which is how Ukraine has managed to make 600 square kilometers of gains in 2026 and achieve a net positive of 100 square kilometers against Russia in May. The powerful Russian army is p***ing its collective pants. And for Putin, this is a shameful situation because it exposes every claim that he makes about what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Russia is trying to counteract the reality seen in Ukraine with exaggerated claims to create the illusion of power. The chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Valery Gerasimov, has shared a view of the Ukraine war that only seems to exist in his head. Since the beginning of the year, a total of 80 settlements and more than 1,700 square kilometers of territory have come under our control, Gerasimov claimed. That alone would be embarrassing for Russia, as it still leaves the country at around the 20% mark of Ukrainian territory taken. However, Ukrainian sources say that the real number is closer to 600 square kilometers taken, which is even worse for Russia. What we're seeing in Ukraine right now is a myth being exposed. Many myths, in fact, starting with the story of Putin as the strongman leader of Russia. Putin wants his people to view him as a protector, even as Ukrainian drones penetrate air defenses in major regions, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. His great shame is that his persuasive powers, both in Russia and on the world stage, don't mean much when oil is burning, fuel is scarce, Russian soldiers are dying in droves, and Ukraine is even blazing through the Russian defenses in the occupied territories. Strength has given way to unearned Russian bravado and exaggerated gains. That alone is a humiliation for Putin. Russia's leader has to know that every word that comes out of his mouth about the supposedly inevitable Russian victory is a lie. And at 73 years of age, Putin is being forced to consider the very real possibility that Ukraine has made it so that the war he started outlives him. And as he ages, Putin is watching his control over his own invasion slip. Ukraine's strikes in St. Petersburg happened during an economic conference dubbed the Russian Davos, which is attended by tens of thousands of people from all over the world. They would have seen the smoke rising into the skies as Ukraine delivered a symbol of Putin's failing grip over his own war. Russia can't defend itself against Ukraine, be that on the ground or in its own skies. So it's not just about the shame that comes with the tangible withdrawal of Russian troops from the territory Ukraine is liberating to be considered here. There's the symbolic shame at play. The shattering of any notion that Russia tries to create about it being the inevitable victor in the Ukraine war. What's happening on the ground doesn't support what comes out of the mouths of Putin and his lackeys. A series of crushing victories achieved by Ukraine show that the country is not only far from being out of the fight, but it has seized the momentum and forced Russia onto the back foot. What we've seen from Ukraine is very impressive. Here's what needs to happen next to ensure that Ukraine can keep it up. Help from Ukraine's supporters needs to continue and be reinforced, and there's been an unexpected development on that front that we're going to reveal in a moment. But in terms of what Ukraine can actively control, the country needs to keep up the strategy that has set the stage for the 600 square kilometers gained so far in 2026, mid-range strikes. 2026 has heralded the arrival of a new category of drones into the Ukrainian armed forces, as Ukraine finally has unmanned aerial vehicles that are cost-effective and capable of ruining Russian logistics and command positions up to 200 kilometers beyond the front lines. Ukraine has been deploying these drones to disrupt Russian supply chains, tear through air defenses, and cripple Russian troop movements in the rear, which has the knock-on effect of creating vulnerabilities on the front. The logic is clear. If Ukraine can stop Russia from reinforcing fortified positions with supplies and soldiers, it creates weaknesses to be exploited. Bedraggled and beaten Russian forces are forced to withdraw because what they need to sustain their defense doesn't arrive. Ukraine strikes deep and then hits hard on the front. A 100 square kilometer net gain in May shows that the strategy is working. A new phase of the war has begun, as Ukraine strangles Russian logistics in the rear. The overland routes that Russia uses to transport troops and supplies are being battered. We see that in Crimea, where the so-called land bridge that connects the occupied peninsula to Ukraine's south has been devastated by swarms of mid-range drones. Russian forces are being forced to disperse, creating yet more opportunities for counterattacks, and Ukraine is going all in on its new strategy. On May 27th, Ukraine announced the launch of its Logistics Lockdown program, which actively rewards units that strike Russian supply lines with more drones and rewards built on the back of a points-based system. The Ministry of Defense has already dedicated $113 million to this program. Any extra influx of cash makes Ukraine even more effective. And that brings us to the second thing that needs to happen for Ukraine to sustain what it's achieved so far in 2026. As Ukraine begins to dominate on the ground, its allies, such as the European Union or EU, must do more to support Zelensky's forces. That's the opinion of the European Commissioner for Defence and Space, Andrius Kubilius, who says that the member states of the EU must be willing to spend over $80 billion on the defence of Ukraine in 2026 alone. With credit to the support of Ukraine, of course, there are also measures on the part of the member states to send the same funds as last year. That is about 70 billion euros, Kubilius said. His point is simple: the more military aid that flows into Ukraine, the better, as the money will bolster the entire nation in both its defensive and offensive strategy that has already led to so many gains. It's not like the EU isn't supporting Ukraine in 2026. On June 8th, the news broke that the EU had dispersed around $3.2 billion to support Ukraine's financial stability and reform, so the support is coming. Kubilius is simply saying that the support can't waver now, after more than 4 years of fighting. The Ukraine war isn't about a local conflict anymore, it's about Europe's collective defense against the Russian menace, and Ukraine has become a vital player in that defense, as it's created the blueprint for defending against Russia and transformed itself into the world leader in military drone technology. So continued support from the EU is vital if Ukraine is to keep up the pressure and force yet more shame on Putin. But a moment ago we told you that there had been an unexpected development in the Ukraine war. In early June, the US Congress took a small step toward rewarding the brilliance that Ukraine has showcased throughout 2026 with more weapons and support. The Ukraine Support Act passed through the House of Representatives by a vote of 226 to 195. That act doesn't guarantee more weapons from the US, but it lays the groundwork for providing assistance to Ukraine in the form of expanded intelligence cooperation, more sanctions against Russia, and security assistance. The passing of this act is vital for Ukraine. It shows Putin that for all of the tumult that he has attempted to create between the US and Ukraine since President Donald Trump came to office, the US still supports Ukraine. That support is now in writing. A foundation for deeper levels of cooperation and more investment into the defense of Ukraine has just been laid in the US. But there is a caveat here. The act still has to pass through the US Senate, and there is no guarantee that it will. Still, the signal is there. A bipartisan bill has moved through the House of Representatives that shows Putin that the support for Ukraine in the US is stronger than he thought. Months of manipulation have failed. The message that Putin didn't want to hear has been sent. And as Ukraine takes back more of what's theirs and seems to be setting up for a back half of 2026 where it will do more of the same, Putin's biggest shame yet may come at the negotiating table. Ukraine has leverage that Russia never expected it to have. It's Ukraine that can now negotiate from a place of strength. Putin thought he held all of the cards. In 2026, Ukraine has pulled out the Uno reverse over and over again. Ukraine isn't about to rest on its laurels. To ensure the mid-range strike campaign that has enabled its 2026 gains continues, Ukraine is building newer and stronger drones. One of those drones just made its debut. The Morrigan has taken flight, and it's playing a crucial role in wrecking Russia's R-280 land bridge. Find out if this mysterious new drone could be the mid-strike game changer that Ukraine needs by watching our video. And if you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe and dive deeper into more videos that expose the realities of Putin's failed invasion. And thank you as always for watching.